Hello and welcome. There have been multiple strikes across at least 10 cities in Ukraine, including in the capital Kiev. Moscow has confirmed that these were ordered by the Kremlin, directly by Vladimir Putin. This seems to be in retaliation for the Kerch Bridge in Crimea being blown up over the weekend. But with these multiple strikes, it seems highly unlikely that this war is going to end anytime soon. And more importantly, is Vladimir Putin showing that he's doubling down? Nothing less than an outright Ukrainian defeat will be enough for him. Nothing less can be a face saver after 7 months of this war.
Chaos, confusion, catastrophe. Sirens rang the air as multiple people were left dead after a series of explosions struck Kiev and several other Ukrainian cities. This was the moment when missiles rained down on the capital, captured by shell-shocked residents. A missile slammed into a glass bridge, which is a popular tourist spot. A playground in Kiev was one of the several civilian targets hit by the strikes. The purpose was clear: inflict as much damage and ensure as many casualties. While Russia's war has dragged on for nearly 8 months, the last time Kiev was struck was back in June. Recording a video while out on the streets, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky accused Russia of targeting energy infrastructure across the country.
They want panic and chaos. They want to destroy our energy system. They are hopeless.
The missile attacks in Ukraine come just 2 days after there was a massive explosion on a bridge linking Crimea to Russia. The blast of the bridge sparked celebrations across Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin admitted that Moscow had launched long-range missile attacks against Ukraine, calling it a response to terrorist acts by Kiev.
Russia's response will be tough, and its scale will be proportionate to the level of threats posed against us.
From mobilizing troops to annexing Ukrainian territory and now doubling down on the military conflict. Is Putin's escalation in Ukraine a losing strategy?
All right, let's go across to our guests. Sushant Sareen is Senior Fellow with the Observer Research Foundation. Fred Wire is a political analyst and a Russia affairs expert. Alexei Goncharenko is a Member of Parliament of Ukraine. Mr. Goncharenko, I'll start with you first. Mr. Putin spoke to the television channels a short while back, and he said that this was in retaliation to what happened in Crimea over the weekend. Do you see this as a significant escalation by the Kremlin in this 200-day-long war? And what may the Ukrainian response be? Because as of right now, more than 10 cities, including your capital, Kiev, have been targeted.
Hello. That is one more lie from Putin, some retaliation. He started this war in 2014. In retaliation for what? Then he started full-scale invasion on February 24. And starting from February 24, every day we have missile attacks. Yes, this time they are very massive, but in general, that's nothing new for us. So I can't tell you, I don't know what are the reasons of Putin. Maybe he wants to show some kind that he is capable of to kill civilians. I don't know. The problem of Putin is that he showed that he is not capable to win over Ukrainian army. His army is losing. They are losing ground every day, starting from the end of August. And now I think this was an attack of desperation. He's desperate because he can't change the situation on the military front. He can't win over our army. So he started again, continues again to kill our civilians. Like he's saying we attacked military targets. What is military target? Playground or university, Kyiv University or other places. They're completely and for sure not military targets. He just tries, and he made it on Monday morning when people are coming to the work, to inflict as many casualties as possible, to kill as many people as possible, and also to destroy energy infrastructure. So Russia is state terrorist, and Putin is terrorist number one in the world. And he
Mr.
just showed it again.
Goncharenko, the Kremlin is saying that this is in response to the blowing up of the bridge in Crimea, the only bridge that connects Crimea to the Russian mainland. Although no group has taken responsibility, the Kremlin firmly believes that this was done by Ukrainian Secret Service agents. In fact, Mr. Putin in his address today said that this was a terrorist act. Do you believe that by bombing the Crimea bridge, you have brought in another front into this war?
What front? We have full-scale invasion from February 24. Don't you know this? He is targeting and hitting our cities, our kindergartens, schools, hospitals from February 24 every day. It was on Friday before Saturday explosion on Crimean Bridge. It was on Thursday. It was on Wednesday. It is every day. So when speaking, Ukraine will fight for our victory, for our land, because we don't have any other option. For us, it's to be or not to be. We have not started this war. We never wanted any war. We are the most peaceful nation on the planet. We are the only nation in human history which voluntarily in 1994 gave up nuclear weaponry. The only one. Well, the only thing we want is peace. But Putin just wants to kill all of us, to make genocide, to wipe out Ukraine from the map of the planet. But we will not let it happen. So we will win this war. And every day we will continue to liberate our towns, villages, and cities. And Putin will lose this war. But what he is doing today with this with these attacks, once again shows that he is terrorist number one. And he is saying that something about terrorist attacks, it's very funny.
Let me ask Fred Weyer, who closely tracks the Kremlin and the Kremlin's responses. The Ukrainians are very clearly saying that even in today's attacks, the missile strikes hit civilian targets, including the University of Kiev. And there's this video that's gone viral of a young girl who was filming at the time that these missile attacks happened. How can Russia, how can Vladimir Putin convince the world that civilians are not on his target when the casualties on the ground seem to amply indicate that indeed civilian targets were hit today?
I think they always are. It's one of the mysteries of this particular operation, why after the first wave of attacks, missile attacks in February, the Russians stopped bombing infrastructure targets. They didn't hit the trains, the bridges on the Dnieper. They still haven't. And only Putin can probably explain why the Russians didn't do that, because the American style of warfare is that they would do that on day one. A barrage of cruise missiles is their signature style of warfare. And so the Russian attacks, and I do take the previous speaker's outrage to heart. I mean, Russia launched a war of aggression against Ukraine. You can't say that often enough. But if we're analyzing the course of this war, it is remarkable that they didn't start this thorough bombing of infrastructure until now. And yes, I'm sure civilian targets are being hit, but I'm sure the Russians are trying to knock out Ukraine's electricity grid. Mm-hmm. In fact, President Zelensky said as much, because most Ukrainian trains run on electricity, so that paralyzes the transport network. They will probably go after bridges. They will probably now be going much more aggressively after what you call dual purpose infrastructure, which is what the Crimea bridge was, civilian object, but also used by the military.
Purposes.
So, a legitimate target, you would say. So I think this is a part of a Russian warfighting strategy.
I'll get Sushant and Mr. Chakrabarti also in, but I think Mr. Goncharenko wants to make a quick point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just that is unfortunately that's not true. They are attacking infrastructure all the time. They are attacking bridges near Odessa, train stations, electricity, everything. So that's just not true what you are saying. On February 24, it was a big attack, but after this, almost every week we have attacks on our infrastructure. Just this day it was massive and concentrated, but before it was. So that's not true that they were not attacking our infrastructure. They were attacking our infrastructure all these 8 months.
Sure. So Sushant Sareen, do you believe, as the Ukrainian, in fact, even Zelensky said this, that this is a sign of desperation since the last week of August? Russia has been losing territory, whether it is in Izium, whether it's in Kupiansk, and then, of course, parts of Donetsk as well. Do you believe that this is Putin's way of signaling back that this war is very much in his control and that he intends to take it to its logical conclusion, which, according to the Kremlin, is a Russian victory and nothing less will suffice?
Look, the war is certainly not going Mr. Putin's way. It hasn't gone Mr. Putin's way right from the first week. That much is very clear. Now, the reasons for that are plenty. It is the kind of support that Ukraine has received from the West. It is also linked to how the Russians have fought the war, both at the strategic level as well as, purely in terms of battlefield tactics. And the recent battlefield reverses are very clear. But I think the immediate provocation was, of course, the destruction of the bridge, and I think that was a severe blow. And there is mounting pressure, or at least that's the impression we get sitting out here, that there is mounting political pressure on Mr. Putin on the way the war is going. Now, clearly, he had to start doing something to show that, enough is enough. And now, the great Russian military machine will press on. And look at the kind of changes they've made in the general staff just over the weekend. All of that clearly indicates that they're going to up the ante. And that seems to be happening with the kind of strikes they have carried out today, which is going to lead to some kind of escalation.
Okay.
Now, whether this will actually lead to some kind of, gains for the Russians, I'm not entirely convinced of that. But I think what is going to happen is that this war is going to become bloodier. This war is going to get further prolonged. And I think whatever little chance there was, Zaka, of any kind of dialogue, some kind of peace negotiation, some kind of ceasefire, I think that's been blown out of the window today. That's the sense I'm getting.
We're also getting a statement from the Ministry of External Affairs. I'll play that out and then I'll go to Ambassador Pinnock on this. The MEA has said that the attack on Ukraine is deeply concerning. They're worried about the escalation in conflict, including the targeting of infrastructure and civilian deaths. We reiterate, the escalation of hostility is in no one's interest. We urge the immediate cessation of hostilities and the urgent return to the path of diplomacy and dialogue. So this is the Ministry of External Affairs' official statement on what's happened today in Ukraine. Let me go to Ambassador Pinnock Chakravarti. India has, of course, taken a very neutral, middle-of-the-road position, if you will, over the last couple of weeks or so since the Prime Minister made that statement in Samarkand in front of Vladimir Putin that this is not the era of war. India has, of course, been doubling down on that position. But how long can India confine itself to these mere statements? Because ultimately, the West, as they say it and as they put it, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. I mean, India is going to be judged by its actions, whether it's the votes at the United Nations or whether it is, continuing to depend less on Russian oil and Russian weaponry. Because mere statements, and increasingly, as these attacks escalate, as Russia escalates, it'll become difficult to just confine to these statements.
Well, one thing we must note and keep in mind whenever India makes a statement, that this is not a war that India started. This is not a war in India's neighborhood. It is a war far away in Europe. And who is responsible for this war? The Europeans themselves and Russia. Why did this war happen? They have to answer for it. We don't have to interfere in this in any physical way, but we will make our position very clear by statements and words and votes, because that is all we are prepared to do at the moment. We can't send soldiers, we can't send boots on the ground. But about the war itself, I think the key word here is escalation. There has been clearly an escalation by this bombing of the bridge to Crimea, and it is who has done it. Nobody can claim it, but we know who has done it, and it's the Ukrainians, obviously. After all, it's their war, so they will try to hit, infrastructure which will hamper the Russian war effort. And clearly, this will hamper the Russian war effort. So I think the escalation part has been set in motion, and I think we will see more escalation in the next weeks and months, which is not good for either side. And I think the Ukrainians are fighting, of course, for their land and for their territory, for their sovereignty, and they are being helped by the West. I think this war has now expanded, and it's not just Russia and Ukraine. It's Russia and Ukraine backed by America and NATO. So I think this is the kind of scenario that one is increasingly inclined to see. And I don't think this is going to help either side.
Okay.
As we have said, this is not the era of war, Prime Minister has said. And I don't think this is going to lead to any further. In fact, any peace initiatives that may have been, or I don't think there was any, but even it recedes even further. So it's not a good sign, and this escalation is a bad sign, and it's going to cause more bloodshed. Missiles will strike all over the place, because Russia is not going to take this lying down.
All right.
So I think both sides realize that there will be hits and counter hits, and poor people, the civilians, will suffer in this, because the missiles sometimes go off their target and go and hit something else, and that's going to happen and I suppose it has happened in
Okay,
Ukraine.
Let me go back to Mr. Goncharenko, the Ukrainian MP. What Ambassador Pinnock was also saying is that by targeting the Crimea bridge, essentially the Ukrainian side was saying that Crimea is also unfinished business. You're also putting Crimea back on the table. And if that signaled to Moscow that if Ukraine is going to hit previously unhit parts of Russian territory as they see it, then Russia is also going to counter that escalation with hits on Kiev and other cities.
First of all, when Crimea became Russian territory?
Post-2014.
That's my question to you. You said that if Ukraine will hit Russian territory, when Crimea became Russian territory? India, like any other countries in the world, do not recognize annexation of Crimea. Crimea is Ukraine, and it was never finished business. It will never finish before Ukraine will regain control over Crimea. So that is the first thing. Second thing, I'm just interested to listen to you and to Ambassador, how they're saying this escalation, and referendum on our territories and annexation of Ukrainian land, 18% of our territory.
Yeah.
It's not escalation, up to you. It's not the problem. It's not violation of international law. Maybe some other country will go and say that part of India is theirs. That will be okay? I'm quite shocked with what I am hearing. Thirdly, I've heard that it's far away, it's European war, India hasn't started, that's true. And it's not for sure any duty of India. But the question is, Ambassador told recently that we just can make statements, votes. So one question, why India is always abstaining in the United Nations? When in the United Nations there is a resolution about stopping of this war, just stopping of the war. Tell me, show me any person in India. I'm sure that all Indians want any war on the planet to be stopped. Why India is not voting for these resolutions about stopping of the war? Just abstains, and again abstains.
Okay.
I can't understand this. And the last thing, it's not just war of Russia against Ukraine. It's war of tyrann Putin against democracy, Ukraine. And the biggest democracy in the world is India. And I think this is very important for India to show that democracy matters, because you also have many neighbors and not all of them are democratic, and they are making threat to you. So I think it's in interest of all democratic nations on the planet to be together. And I hope that Indian government will change their position. And I'm very thankful to
Sushant, I'll give you the final word. I've got a minute to respond to what the Ukrainian MP just said.
Zaka, I don't want to respond to what he said because I can understand where he's coming from. But, listening to these people is rather rich when they start talking about democracy and stuff like that. Because we've seen, the kind of hypocrisy which goes with democracy, especially in the Western countries. But having said that, one thing is very important for India. As long as, it's all very well for the West to tell us that why are you buying Russian oil? What should we do? Let our economy go bust? Let our people die of hunger? What should we do? Do we not have a responsibility to our own people? The Western countries are cornering all the gas and the oil from the Middle Eastern markets. What are we supposed to do then? There are countries which are not able to get gas or oil even if they're ready to pay the price, because all these supplies are being commandeered by the Western countries. What are we supposed to do then? Die simply so that these guys can keep fighting, the Americans and the Western countries can, and then to hear these gratuitous remarks like that German foreign minister who does not know. I don't even know whether she's lettered enough to know what the Kashmir problem is. So when they pontificate and they feel they have a right to interfere in our business, then I think for them to expect that we are going to compromise on our security, on our interests, simply because of some hoary principle which they are propounding all over the world, I think that's rather rich coming from.
All right. We'll have to leave it at that, Sushant. I'm completely out of time. We're a truncated debate tonight, but we'll leave it at that. We'll see how this story plays out. There's going to be a UN vote later on tonight on these developments. An urgent G7 meeting has also been called. We'll keep a track of both of those developments. As we close, a quick reminder. These are the nominees for the Indian of the Year Social Change category. You can watch the grand finale live on the 12th of October, this Wednesday, starting 6 p.m. only here on CNN News 18.